12 kilometers beneath the surface of the Earth. That's the exact depth humans managed to reach on the Kola Peninsula before the planet itself began pushing back. At first glance, drilling deeper seems like nothing more than a matter of better technology, more time, and more money. But the deeper you go, the more extreme the conditions become. Past 12 kilometers down, temperatures climb above 200 degrees, metal starts to deform, drilling tools shatter, and solid rock itself begins behaving almost like plastic under crushing pressure. The strangest discoveries, though, came even further down. During ultra-deep drilling, scientists found water-filled cracks, unexplained gases, and rock formations that defied everything geologists expected to find. Today, we're exploring exactly how deep humanity has managed to dig and what's actually waiting down there in places no one has ever reached before. Have you ever wondered why we still haven't drilled straight through our own planet? It sounds like a simple question of powerful enough equipment and enough patience. But at 12 kilometers down, the Earth itself starts setting the rules. This is where the familiar world ends and a different one begins. One where hardened steel behaves like soft clay. On the Kola Peninsula, engineers spent decades pushing their way downward. The deeper they drilled, the further reality drifted from their calculations. Everything tracked with predictions down to 7 kilometers. But once the drill approached 12,000 meters, things started going strange. Temperatures spiked to 180 degrees Celsius, nearly double what scientists had predicted for that depth. Instruments simply couldn't withstand heat that extreme. Picture the process itself. An enormous platform lowering a column of steel pipe weighing hundreds of tons into the ground, tipped with a diamond-edged drill bit. Under normal conditions, that bit should slice through granite like a knife through butter. But at this depth, granite stops behaving like ordinary rock. Pressure exceeding 1,000 atmospheres literally flattened the borehole walls, turning solid stone into something closer to thick honey. Within just a few rotations, the metal overheated and instantly lost its strength. The most exhausting part of the job was replacing equipment. Swapping out a single drill bit meant hauling an entire column of pipe back to the surface, a task that consumed a full day of continuous labor. And during every hour the drill sat idle, the planet was quietly healing its own wound. The viscous rock, under enormous pressure, would slump back into the hole, narrowing the shaft and forcing engineers to re-drill sections they had already cleared the day before. It became an endless battle against the Earth's interior. Engines roared under strain, and steel pipe twisted like thin thread. Sometimes the steel simply snapped inside the shaft, and retrieving fragments from kilometers underground proved nearly impossible. Any serious failure meant months of grueling work erased in an instant, forcing teams to start a fresh shaft slightly off from the original site. Scientists were genuinely baffled. The Earth's crust turned out to be far more complex than anyone had assumed, actively resisting every attempt to penetrate it. But the planet's physical resistance was only the first obstacle. When engineers finally managed to bring soil samples up from record depths, an entirely new surprise was waiting: water. Something that, by every expectation, simply shouldn't exist in rock that hot. Picture standing 7 kilometers underground, surrounded by scorching granite and crushing pressure, with no light and no oxygen. You'd expect total emptiness and silence. Instead, in that furnace-like environment, scientists found something that permanently reshaped our understanding of both biology and the planet's internal structure. Before drilling began on the Kola Peninsula, geologists were confident that digging would actually get easier the deeper they went. The theory held that granite would eventually give way to dense, dry basalt, and that water simply couldn't penetrate solid rock at such depths. Reality delivered a surprise that shook the scientific community. Instead of dry stone, drillers hit zones completely saturated with water. And this wasn't ordinary river or ocean water. Several kilometers down, researchers found a hot, mineral-saturated solution under such extreme pressure that contact with the borehole could instantly flash it into steam, capable of destroying equipment. Yet the presence of moisture wasn't even the strangest part. In soil samples pulled from beyond 6,700 meters, biologists found traces of life. It remains a genuinely startling case, one still debated today. Scientists discovered fossilized remains of microscopic organisms. 24 species of ancient plankton preserved in rock roughly 2 billion years old. How could such fragile biological structures survive in conditions where rock itself begins to melt? These organisms weren't found in soft surface layers, but buried within the planet's deepest, most ancient foundations, meaning life on Earth likely emerged far earlier and spread to far greater depths than anyone had previously believed. Reaching that truth, however, came with staggering technical challenges. Flammable gases began escaping from every borehole alongside the water. Helium, hydrogen, and methane venting straight from the depths, creating a constant fire hazard. Every additional meter of descent became both a scientific milestone and a genuine test of survival. Workers in protective helmets watched their instruments constantly, knowing that a single stray spark in an environment saturated with gas could trigger disaster. Scientists realized they'd stumbled onto an enormous natural reservoir no one had ever suspected existed. The planet's interior turned out to be a living, dynamic system all its own. While some researchers celebrated the biological discoveries and rare gas deposits, others began noticing something far stranger. The deeper the drill descended, the more the character of the sounds rising from below began to shift. Sensors installed to monitor movement within the crust started picking up something that defied rational explanation. Those recordings would soon become the foundation for one of the most unsettling legends in the history of science, one that sent chills through millions of people around the world. A wave of eerie fascination swept the globe when Western newspapers began publishing stories about terrifying recordings supposedly coming from deep within the Earth. According to the claims, researchers had lowered an ultra-sensitive microphone 12 kilometers down and captured horrifying sounds. The recording spread across the planet almost instantly, picking up increasingly gruesome details along the way. But what did the instruments at the deepest point ever reached on Earth actually record? The truth turned out to be far more fascinating and far more complicated than any urban legend. The Kola Superdeep Borehole genuinely did use acoustic sensors. Engineers needed to monitor how the drill bit was performing and detect even the faintest shifts in the surrounding rock. At that depth, sound doesn't travel the way it does on the surface. Dense rock under monstrous pressure turns into a massive natural resonator. Any shift in the granite layers, or any crack of breaking metal, transformed into genuinely eerie sounds. Picture the scene in the surface laboratory, a low hum coming through the speakers, suddenly interrupted by a high-pitched shriek and metallic screeching. Deep within that superheated environment, sound waves distorted almost beyond recognition. Pumps circulating drilling fluid produced rhythmic pulses that, combined with the roar of working turbines, resembled something like the strange groaning of a crowd. Here's an interesting detail. The sounds that eventually became urban legend were, in reality, a skillfully edited audio hoax. But the actual noises Soviet scientists recorded were no less remarkable. They were the sounds of a living planet. Rock at 12 kilometers down is in constant motion, producing something like the sound of a massive ice sheet slowly cracking apart, amplified 1,000-fold. Project director David Huberman later recalled these rumors with a touch of irony, confirming that genuinely unexplainable situations did occur on site. On one occasion, the drill bit suddenly dropped into open space, even though calculations indicated solid rock should have been there. The event triggered a sharp pressure spike and a strange acoustic shockwave. But rather than anything supernatural, scientists had stumbled onto a unique geological phenomenon, a pocket where gas under enormous pressure was tearing rock apart, generating that roaring sound. Every such incident left engineers frozen in place, since silence over the speakers was often more terrifying than the loudest noise. It usually meant a communication failure or a catastrophic equipment failure. The onshore experiment proved that punching through the granite shield to reach the Earth's center was nearly impossible, but researchers' enthusiasm didn't fade. If continental crust was simply too thick and too hot, one logical idea emerged: try drilling where the crust is thinnest. Engineers turned their attention to the ocean, hoping water would work in their favor. What they didn't realize was that the depths beneath the waves hid traps that would make drilling anything but a simple task. So why would drilling underwater actually be easier if conditions on land are more manageable? The answer lies in some genuinely striking numbers. While continental crust runs about 40 kilometers thick, oceanic crust shrinks to just 5 to 7 kilometers. That looks like the shortest possible path to the mantle. But in practice, that short path turned into a genuine engineering nightmare. There, engineers faced forces capable of destroying equipment in an instant. The most ambitious of these efforts, called Project Mohole, launched back in the 1960s. The idea was audacious: drill into the floor of the Pacific Ocean from a ship on the surface. Consider the challenge involved. Lowering a drill bit 3,500 meters just to reach the seafloor, then drilling into the rock beneath it. It's the equivalent of trying to drill through a concrete slab on land while standing on the roof of a skyscraper. Any shift in the water or gust of wind could bend the entire drilling column. One incident nearly brought the whole project to a halt. During testing, the ship encountered a powerful underwater current that oceanographers hadn't even known existed. A massive volume of water at depth began shifting with such force that the steel cables holding the vessel in place pulled as taut as violin strings. Engineers on deck watched in horror as the drilling tower began to tilt. Had the column snapped at that moment, flying fragments of steel could have torn through the ship's hull and ended the mission entirely. Only sheer luck, combined with the captain's skillful handling of the engines, prevented disaster. But the current wasn't the only problem. The moment the drill touched the ocean floor, it became clear that the rock down there behaved aggressively. Instead of soft sediment, drillers ran into basalt nearly as hard as diamond. The teeth on even the toughest drill bits wore down within just a few hours of operation. Worse still, every bit replacement turned into an extraordinarily complex operation. Engineers had to hit the exact same tiny opening on the ocean floor from several kilometers above it. Japanese researchers aboard the vessel Chikyu pushed even further, building a floating drilling platform equivalent to a 30-story building. They used advanced computer systems to hold the ship in a single position with pinpoint accuracy down to a few centimeters. But even that technology couldn't overcome nature's raw power. At the junction of tectonic plates beneath the ocean, gas pressure turned out to be so extreme that boreholes began ejecting, scorching mud that jammed every mechanism involved. Eventually, humanity accepted a difficult truth. Thin oceanic crust turned out to be better defended than the thick granite shield of the continents. We still haven't managed to drill completely through it. While some teams struggled with narrow boreholes, others were carving gigantic craters into the planet's surface. Artificial abysses so vast, they began generating their own climate anomalies and even posed a threat to aircraft passing overhead. So what actually happens inside a pit larger than an entire city? Picture a crater so deep that a 5-story building sitting at the bottom would look no bigger than a matchbox. This is the famous Mir mine in Yakutia, with a depth exceeding 500 meters. This man-made abyss is so enormous that aircraft are officially banned from flying over it. That's not just a precaution. Legend has it the pit can act like a trap, literally pulling aircraft down out of the sky. When a helicopter flies over that massive bowl-shaped void, physics turns genuinely dangerous. The enormous volume of cold air trapped inside the crater creates powerful downdrafts. The aircraft loses lift and begins falling into the abyss as though into empty space. The air stops supporting the rotor blades, and the helicopter gets pulled into the funnel like debris caught in a whirlpool. This is a real physical phenomenon, one that has turned deep open-pit mines into some of the most dangerous locations anywhere on the planet. It isn't just the air that behaves strangely. The sheer scale of the machinery working at the bottom is staggering. Dump trucks standing as tall as a 3-story building crawl slowly along the winding roads spiraling around the crater's walls. From above, they look like tiny insects. If the brakes on one of these machines were to fail, stopping it would be virtually impossible. In one recorded incident, a massive truck skidded on a slick section of road, and only the driver's split-second decision to steer the enormous vehicle straight into the rock wall prevented a catastrophic fall. Interestingly, deep pits like this begin generating their own microclimates. While the surface bakes intolerable heat, the bottom can experience bitter cold, and fog can grow so thick that drivers can't even see the hood of their own vehicle. At the Bingham Canyon mine in the United States, with a depth reaching 1,000 meters, engineers encountered an even more unsettling phenomenon: massive landslides. In 2013, A collapse there sent 65 million tons of rock crashing down, an event so powerful that seismic sensors registered it as equivalent to a small earthquake. Humans dug these enormous pits, chasing diamonds and copper, excavating the ground for decades on end. But no matter how much material we've removed, we've barely scratched the surface. Even the deepest open-pit mines on Earth amount to nothing more than faint scratches compared to the true thickness of the planet's crust. So with all our technology and massive machinery, why did we stop? Why did humanity abandon deep drilling and start searching for other paths forward? The answer lies behind an invisible boundary we created ourselves, and within new projects that today sound like madness, even to the boldest engineers. We've arrived at a final frontier, where the real question isn't about money anymore. It's whether the planet itself can withstand our curiosity. Have you ever considered what lies directly beneath your feet, 40 kilometers down? That's where the mantle begins. A colossal ocean of molten rock making up 80% of the planet's total volume. We've sent spacecraft to Mars and out into open space, yet throughout our entire history, humanity has never managed to punch through the Earth's thin outer shell. Today, the race to reach greater depths has entered a new, quieter phase, with engineers deploying next-generation technology to attempt the impossible. The longest boreholes in the world right now aren't on the Kola Peninsula anymore. Those records now belong to oil giants operating in Qatar and on Russia's Sakhalin Island. A borehole called Adoptu More has surpassed 12,300 meters in length. But there's a fascinating detail here. These boreholes don't run straight down. They're extraordinarily complex structures that descend vertically at first, then gradually curve sideways, running for kilometers beneath the seafloor. It's essentially precision engineering on an enormous scale. Imagine steering a flexible needle from a neighboring city, trying to hit a thin layer of an oil deposit with pinpoint accuracy. One remarkable incident occurred while drilling one of these extra-long boreholes. At a certain depth, the drill bit simply stopped responding to commands. Telemetry suddenly showed the drill head rotating in reverse, seemingly defying the laws of mechanics. Engineers were stunned. It looked as though the Earth's interior was physically twisting the steel itself. It turned out that the sheer length of the pipe had created a torsion effect. The steel had accumulated so much rotational energy that it had essentially become a giant coiled spring. When the bit hit an obstruction, that stored energy released all at once, nearly tearing the entire structure apart. It was a striking demonstration that, at these extreme distances, metal simply stops behaving predictably. So why don't we just drill straight down to the same depth vertically? The answer is frustratingly simple. It's both an economic and a technical dead end. The deeper you go, the heavier the pipe column becomes. At around 15 kilometers, steel begins tearing apart under its own weight. We've hit the physical limit of the materials available to us. Pushing further would require composite materials that don't exist yet, along with cooling systems capable of withstanding temperatures around 300 degrees Celsius. Even so, scientists are now preparing Project M2M, aiming for humanity's first ever direct contact with the Earth's mantle. The plan involves building autonomous robots capable of operating in that hostile environment.